Welcome to E-commerce with Coffee, a podcast powered by Amber Engine, where we share e-com secrets for brands over your favorite brew. We start with the caffeine and then leap enthusiastically into behind-the-scenes e-com insights that led to the success of our guests. I'm Nate Svoboda, and I'm about to serve you up the best. Let's get started. Welcome to today's episode of E-commerce with Coffee. In this conversation, I am speaking with Thomas Vosper. He is the CEO and co-founder of Aisle 3, and he's setting out to improve the shopper's buying journey by building a platform where purchasers can be fully confident in the products that they are selecting. So, Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nate.
Yeah, really excited for the conversation. But before we dive in, I know at least in the first 8 months of Aisle 3, it's obviously been a bit longer than that at this point. You guys have been around, but you were working seven days a week, 20 hours a day. Caffeine must play some role in your life. Is that a fair assumption?
Absolutely right. The morning is pretty much powered by coffee, and then the evening working sessions are probably powered by wine. And I think that's probably the outcome of the last couple of years working from home and managing a team remotely and working all hours in a startup.
Nope, that is 100%
said,
fair.
It is the afternoon here in the UK. So considering as a founder, probably like many fellow founders, I rarely get much sleep. I'm actually at 4:30 in the afternoon on a cup of tea right now to just control some of my caffeine intake.
Any particular type of tea? Is it, just like a green, black, herbal?
Nate, I'm English. It's a breakfast tea with proper milk in it.
There we go. That's what I figured. Cool. Well, really excited for all the stuff we're going to dive into today. But before we do, can you give us an outline of Aisle 3 and maybe more specifically, what is the problem that, you set out to solve?
Yeah, so Nate, I've been in e-commerce for about 15 years, spent about half of that at Amazon, joining when it was a very small team in the UK, building the marketplace there. A couple of years at Tesco, a couple of years in startups as well, at a price comparison startup. And I think there's been one consistent theme over those last 15 years that despite everyone talking about being very customer centric, actually what's happening is we as shoppers have come to accept or adapt what is actually a pretty broken experience when we try and buy something online. And so I think, many people listening, maybe you appreciate the same problem I find, that even something trivial like trying to buy a pair of sneakers in a size that fits you, even though you know the brand and the color and maybe even the retailer that you want to go to, it becomes an exercise in opening up 6 or 7 different tabs across the top of your browser, trying to navigate your way through ads and pop-ups and text links. And, over the last couple of years at R3, we've pulled together a team that really just don't want to accept or adapt that that's the way that we should shop online.
So can you talk to me then a little bit about the role Aisle 3 plays and the responsibility on you, on the retailers versus on the brands?
Yeah, so when I think about probably the defining moment in Amazon's history that catapulted it above eBay, which seems like a really bizarre thing to say right now, given those businesses, it was really their way of aggregating like this single detail page and then listing multiple merchants. But way back 15 years ago and ever since, that's been at the reliance of retailers and brands to actually provide product information into the Amazon ecosystem, just as they do into Google Shopping, just as they do into other platforms and marketplaces. And the standard of data that is out there is shall we say, varied. And so this manifests itself with you seeing lots of duplicate listings and lots of ads or own brand products or very broken product details. And that's really painful for shoppers, but it's also really painful for retailers and brands because it then puts them into this sort of catch-22 situation of like, how do you get found? And actually then you probably have to put more budget to try and get yourself above the line to be seen. Even on marketplaces now, which are littered with ads, it's a very difficult situation for retailers and brands as well as the shopper.
So help me understand, what are some of the critical things that consumers want or need to know today about a product before they hit the buy button?
Well, look, I think there's a bunch of fundamental questions that we look at when we buy, right? You know, you really want to see who's the cheapest, who's the most expensive. Does my favorite retailer sell that product? Is there a particular promotion right now? Is it in stock? What speed of delivery? And it's really disjointed to try and find that information all in one central place. So going back to why we created R3, we kind of recognize that this whole ecosystem is powered by it's powered by feeds and by product details that are distributed by retailers. And that's really difficult to match up. And I've seen that intimately across 3 or 4 businesses now. And so we decided to see what would happen if we took the same sort of face recognition technology that watches you walk through an airport and say, uh, how about if we applied that to a bunch of different sneakers, all pointing in different directions, and see if we can try and use that alongside a few other elements of secret sauce, which I kind of won't give away right now, that shows us to say, look, we could actually match all of these up, and all of these unrelated retailers don't really even know each other exists. We can pull all the details together so that you as a shopper, next time you buy a pair of green Nike Air Force Ones, can genuinely see the 6, 7, 20 to however many retailers it is that has that product available. You see all the offers in one place.
Right. Now you talked a little bit about the varied standard of data, right? And some people would say that it's pretty low, right? Generally, if you go to a manufacturer's site, you'll find tons of content that they've developed most of the time, but also a lot of the time that content doesn't make it to the retailer's website or, to wherever. So I guess help me understand, why is that not happening?
It's incredibly complex for retailers to manage their product catalogs, and increasingly businesses are quite siloed in their thinking. So they certainly can push out a lot of content, or maybe they have some fantastic images and fantastic information on a product detail page, but that often doesn't translate itself into a product feed, which sometimes contains no images or only one image. And of course, then there's a naming convention. So, what is a unique identifier when you're trying to aggregate that on a marketplace or into something like Google Shopping? Do you use the barcode number? Is it the American version, UPC? Is it the EAN? Do you use a GTIN? Do the systems recognize a product code, a manufacturer number? What is the right detail? And actually, just as a small anecdotal way to how humans also try and hack this system as well. When I back in my Amazon days, way before Amazon had entered grocery, there was a requirement to create this new detail page on Amazon. You would have to enter should we say, a proper barcode number, so one that had been properly issued by GS1 or a proper organization. And many sellers would try and do that so that they didn't appear on an aggregated view if they weren't necessarily the cheapest, as a way to try and hack the system. Problem that this caused when we launched the grocery category is that, where do you get barcodes from for products that don't sell on Amazon? Like, walk to the larder and open up your cupboard and have a look at a tin of beans, which isn't sold on Amazon anytime soon. And so, of course, that was a huge data issue for the company when we launched the grocery category in the UK, and all of a sudden these product detail pages that had got televisions and PlayStations on suddenly were being linked to a tin of beans, right? And the price of a tin of beans. And that's one of the world's very biggest organizations that is powered by data, whose fundamental business was catapulted ahead of all of its competitors because of an aggregated product page and a single detail page. And that's a break straight away.
Yeah. Well, and then, obviously focusing on Amazon for just a second, when you go look at a product, I know I've had instances where I look at something and it'll have 20,000 5-star reviews. And you think to yourself, well, how is that even possible? And sometimes you dig down, and there have been times where the SKUs have been switched, and so the reviews are actually relevant to a completely different product. And so, for me, I do that much research, but there are tons and tons of people that don't even do that much due diligence when they're trying to make a purchase online. And usually I just trust Amazon as the default, but there are even instances where you can't just do that.
Yeah.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Well, you're right. It's a really good point. It's super interesting that there is a really rich ecosystem of platforms and communities that talk about sellers and retailers as a rating, where you can leave your reviews on what happened when you walked into a store or what happened when you used a particular shop online. But you're right, product reviews generally find themselves being confined to possibly incentivized or some plain comedians, actually. I mean, Amazon reviews historically are hilarious. Well, I'm sure someone out there knows the hair removal spike of sales that happened on Amazon once. Try and look that one up, or the Three Wolves t-shirt. And it's fascinating. But I guess where we see kind of reviews come in is that, we at R3 are fixing product aggregation from a technical aspect, but actually also product discovery and trust comes from community. And so we think that a vote from a friend is worth 1,000 of these anonymized, incentivized reviews. And by aggregating products, we enable you to not only see all of your offers, but then be able to save that onto your shopping list that you can then share with your friends or your family, your nearest or dearest, or if you have someone that's a particular expert, and really give you an honest opinion on an item before you make a purchase. So you're super, super informed.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's like going shopping. It's like going shopping with your friends, but a lot easier because you don't actually have to go with people in person.
Absolutely, and that doesn't really make it, doesn't really impact whether you're the sort of shopper that is someone who is used to making your lists and filling out an Excel spreadsheet. Like, we can make that easy and then have one central place that you can share. Or if you're the person that wants to just see like what's at the top and make it quick and easy for me, we can also at that point give you the confidence of all of the offers that you otherwise wouldn't have seen.
No, absolutely. Now, something else that I know you've talked about before. We obviously focus on Amazon, but there are other marketplaces, I guess, or online marketplaces that have popped up that are either more niche or, have some value that they're offering to the consumer beyond just, here's Amazon, they sell everything, right? Do you believe that, the increase in like more niche marketplaces that offer that value is a benefit to the consumer? Or I guess, do you still believe in the end that, that's not the right way to go?
I think it's really interesting, first of all. I think if you kind of go back historically through time, like the very big marketplaces and search engines become incredibly generic. And I think we do a very good job of patting ourselves on the back and saying, wow, that was pretty smart of me to be able to find that deal because that took ages, rather than saying, actually, it shouldn't take that long and you shouldn't have to filter your way
What's your
through.
time worth
Yeah,
and the time you
exactly.
spent
Like,
looking for that deal?
exactly right. You shouldn't have to filter through own brand products or challenger brand products or 75% of above the fold being ads. And that part is like, I think we probably kind of congratulate ourselves a little bit there. And so what's kind of got lost in all of this is that, the really big businesses are trying to win now in logistics, or they're trying to win now in payments or building a platform. And so I definitely understand this rise of like the niche marketplace and the niche sellers, because what they're trying to do, similar to our mission, what we're trying to do is make shopping cheaper, quicker, easier, and a lot more joyful by really thinking about, what's that discovery piece? What's that trust piece? How do you talk to the shopper before the buy button? Because that part's really been lost.
Yeah. Well, and actually to that point, another thing I wanted to get your opinion on. So we've been hearing a lot more in recent years, right, about promoted products and ads on Amazon and a bunch of other channels. And theoretically, although these are paid ads, the sales channel is incentivized to only show the ad to a consumer that would actually resonate with that ad, right? Because at the end of the day, if the user doesn't click, then no one's going to get paid on it. But how well or not, in your opinion, do you think that these algorithm anchored product information works when it actually comes to showing consumers what they're looking for and what they want?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The whole concept of ads is that we, in theory, shouldn't mind if we see a relevant targeted ad to us at the right time. But despite the sophistication of trillion-dollar businesses, I'm sure we all know that experience of looking for a sneaker in a brand in a color and then still seeing lots of ads that are for different colors, or are text links that take us to a different site with out that color that we were looking for anywhere on that page. So absolutely, you would think that this is something that is optimized for shoppers, because it needs to be, right, for the retailers to be spending their advertising dollars, and it needs to be a good experience for shoppers. But why is that not the case?
That's a fair question. So I'm trying to decide.
I mean, why do I look for Nike on a search engine or a marketplace and get a different brand? Actually, why do Nike have to pay to be the top, by the way?
Pay to be the top of their own brand name search term?
Mm-hmm.
That's a fair question. Why should your competitor be able to win if someone Googles your specific name?
Mm-hmm. And there's a technical reason for that, by the way, because it's really, really incredibly difficult to manage vertical search. So Google search engines have excelled in being able to ingest as much information as possible and have a very horizontal search, so that they can take you to the place where you are likely or most likely to find the right answer. But that's very different from actually wanting the exact answer. And that's very different. That's very, very difficult to solve when you have a commercial model which is encouraging shoppers to click on 5 different answers, because then you can charge 5 advertisers rather than just showing you one and having you click once. So there's a commercial model there. And then there's also the data issues, particularly in shopping, that we've talked about, which are incredibly challenging to solve. And that's really the big opportunity that we're trying to fix right now. And I think there's a handful of businesses, by the way, on the planet that really get this, that really get that there's an opportunity in e-commerce to aggregate all of that garbled data and put it into something that's super, super meaningful right at the front of the shopper before they even get to the buy button, and show them exactly what they want at exactly the right time.
And is that, obviously all of that is encompassed in what you guys are doing at Aisle 3, but are there any, tools or solutions that either, you and your teams are using, or that you recommend that brands and retailers should start implementing in order to make this whole process easiher?
Gosh, that's like a super massive question there. It's honestly, I can't really.
If you had to narrow it down,
yeah, like I can't almost kind of really answer that one, because there's so many different ways. I guess how you do something and the tools that you use actually matters less than the actual philosophy and the mission and the vision you have behind the business. And there's so many businesses that I hear that talk about thinking about using data, but without actually really using it. They just look at it, or thinking about being customer centric, but then they actually do stuff that isn't really customer centric. And so it's really very rarely a case of what you use. It's how you're using something. And I'll give you one anecdote. I won't name them and embarrass them, but at a very major conference with thousands of people in the room, a very huge retailer walked in for a keynote speech and said, "Now is a really important day for us. We've built a great business, but we haven't always had our eye on the prize. And so we are going to think of nothing more than the customer going forwards. Nothing more. Nothing else will be on our mind, because that's what Amazon do."
It's like I was with you in that statement right up until that point, because you're doing something because it's what somebody else does, right?
Absolutely. You're watching the competition. So, you always have to, as a mindset, think about what are you doing for the customer? What's the right thing for the customer? And genuinely live and breathe that.
Yeah, no, and that's super fair. And not to take us down another rabbit hole, or a rabbit hole, but that's what I think Steve Jobs always said in Apple, right? Is they weren't going to look at what Dell and Microsoft and whatever were doing. They just wanted to compete against themselves, right? Continually make themselves better. So I see a lot of similarities in what you just said there.
Thank you. I'll take that as a huge compliment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess you talk about this universal view of shopping, right? That's something that I've heard you mention before. Can you expand upon that idea and really what do you mean by that? What does that look like for the consumer?
Yeah, I have a vision that you never need to open another app or a tab to shop, and that we fix that. We fix that right the way from finding a product, sharing that with your friends and family, and getting advice on that product, and then making a purchase through a single cloud basket, regardless of the retailer that sells that product. And so I have this vision that, someone in any country that we could name right now opens an online store this evening, and they upload their first few products into their inventory, and we recognize that site exists. We understand the products on that site, and we probably understand the products on that site as well as even the retailer themselves understands that product, and can match all of those offers across lots and lots of different countries and lots of different retailers who don't even know that they exist. And that's one single view for every single product and offer across the entire planet, with a single checkout as well.
Okay. No, and so that makes total sense. Now, this is another very loose-ended question, kind of like the one a minute ago. So feel free to say that in a minute. But what are some of the things that need to be done on the brand or manufacturer and on the retailer side to support this universal view, right? Outside of just what you and your team at Aisle 3 is doing?
Well, we would work very closely with retailers and brands. We currently have a waiting list of 1,000 retailers right now on our waiting to join Aisle 3. We're always looking to work with those retailers to make sure that they're optimizing their data in a way that makes sense for us to be able to aggregate. But really, the secret sauce for us is we can do that without the retailers' involvement. And so, we can do a lot of the heavy lifting when a retailer sees us as the source of truth and whitelists us as a business, so that we're able to ingest their data from lots and lots of different sources, so we can portray them in the best light.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think that the answer to this we've already discussed a little bit, but maybe even ask you to make a prediction here. What should the consumer expect to change in terms of, their experience when shopping online over the next 3 to 5 years, let's say?
I really hope that the whole experience becomes a lot quicker and a lot easier. I hope that it causes a lot less anxiety and gives us all back a lot of more time in our lives. And I'd just like to expand on that, because that's also something that I feel very strongly about. Firstly, it's very time consuming to try and navigate through products that we're not interested, adverts that aren't relevant to us, and a really bad broken shopping experience that has a number of different reasons, which we talked about, part commercial, part data. Right? I think that needs to be solved, and I hope that that's something we can solve. If we don't, then I hope someone else solves it, because I think it needs fixing. But the other thing that I find quite interesting and stimulating is that actually we are increasingly under time pressure, and we're also increasingly under a high mental load. Over the last 2 years, many individuals, and I say this fully aware of the fact that if you worked in hospitality or another industry over the last 2 years, it would have been a horrific experience. Thankfully, I'm really grateful to have been able to build a business remotely, because we're an online business, and there are many people in a similar situation whose home lives and work lives have now kind of merged into one, and you kind of sit and you work at the same desk in your house, and that transcends from like working to then entertainment into shopping in the evening, and it all kind of blurs into one. And so we have these continual pressures of us all in the same place. And at the point that you finally spend hours going through a shopping journey, getting ready to buy something, the idea that there is some sort of pop-up, some sort of distraction, or some sort of nudge that effectively is saying to you, are you sure? And that kind of level of distraction and anxiety, I would love to see us eliminate. I'd love to see that whole journey being super easy to find products, find trust with a retailer or brand, find confidence that you can order something and it's going to turn up in a time that you want, and then the product's going to arrive, and it's all going to be super, super easy, super quick, remove all of the stress, and life's too short.
No, I love that. And at the end of the day, what can you do at that time that you're saving, right? People are only going to continue shopping online. Let's make it easier for them. I've always heard it said, people have always said, right, consumers want more and more choice. That's true to a point, but I would argue, and I've heard, consumers don't just want more choice; they want better choice, right? They want things that are relevant to them that they might actually want to purchase. Before we wrap it up, because you just hit on it, I'd love if you could talk to us a little bit about your experience starting a business fully remote, right? I mean, so is it about a year and a half now that Aisle 3's been around? Talk to us a little
We're
bit
actually
about the
coming up
journey.
to 2 years. So we founded
Oh, wow.
we actually founded the business about a week before the UK went into its first ever lockdown. It was that kind of like perfect storm for us as individuals where our employer at the time, so I'm my co-founder at our last employer, and they unfortunately wound down the business pretty suddenly and unexpectedly. And so that really was an opportunity after, nearly 15 years in corporate with a few years in the kind of cold face as an employee in a startup, to say, well, actually, it's a bit of a square peg in a round hole. What would happen if I, backed by like my family, backed by my friends, backed by like, the commercial partners and business friends that I've had over the years. What would happen if now is maybe the time for us to try and solve the problem ourselves? And I must admit, it was pretty scary at the start, taking out a £25,000 Virgin startup loan to bootstrap a business for two co-founders with families and mortgages, like young children, just as we enter a pandemic. It was incredibly intimidating. And by the way, the knot's still in the stomach 2 years later. That doesn't really
That's what the T
go.
is for, right?
Yeah, that doesn't really go. That's why I'm sure that for as much as you may read on LinkedIn of founders that get up and meditate, do a gratitude journal, and have a cold shower, and then have a really healthy breakfast. The reality is, and not to say this is a great thing, but the reality is that most of us can't eat breakfast, and we just exist on coffee until we get to the evening when maybe we're lucky and it becomes wine.
No, and that's fair. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think that the entrepreneurial journey has been really over glamorized, right? Because obviously if you have the drive, you should never not go for it. But people need to be realistic about it and realize that it's not always just the successes and the awesome moments. There's a lot of really crappy moments too that, you gotta deal with. So, you know, given the fact that it's such a unique time when you started this business, what would you say was, the most challenging part, I guess, of all of the things that you've had to do, whether that was finding talent, whether that was building the business itself?
Yeah, so certainly finding talent has been both a challenge but also a massive opportunity. And that's been a general theme for almost everything that we've had within the business. There have been huge challenges in almost every single aspect of building a business. But one thing that myself and my co-founder have always focused on very clearly is turning those negatives into positives. And so, it's very difficult to build a culture when the entire business is built remotely, but building the business entirely remotely means that you actually get to tap into talent in different countries that you otherwise would never have even had a conversation. I mean, here we are having a conversation across across the Atlantic, right? That we just wouldn't have, our paths would have hardly crossed without the events of the last 2 years. And so that's been really difficult to build a business when you can't sit alongside someone sometimes, and sometimes that's really great to do that. And also from the investment side of things, so we've raised about £1 million now across a couple of rounds of investment. And there are investors that I've never met. I've never shook their hand, looked them in the eyes and said, don't worry, like, I'm going to do my best not to lose your money, because 99% of startups actually do fail, and this is kind of a big thing that we're going for here now. So so let's feel excited about it, but realize that it's going to be a really tough journey for us to do that, and we need your support. And yet I've still not been able to shake anyone's hand and look them in the eye whilst I've been able to say that, and that in itself
No,
is a
and
challenge.
absolutely. And it really is interesting how, real relationships that are completely online can be, right? Whether, in business, when, you have a customer or a client or a partner you may work with for years, and to your point, you never actually look them in the eyes. You're just staring at a computer screen. Interesting things that COVID has done, and honestly, probably not something that's ever going to go away at this point.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's important to reflect that, feel very privileged that I was in a situation where I was able to be supported by my family and my friends. I was very lucky to be able to uh, take the risk of taking a loan, which many people don't even have options to finance to start a business. Um, and also, I was in an area which wasn't decimated by the fallout of everything closing, and so I suppose in part that's a little bit of an extra burden as well, right? Because to talk to every founder and they'll probably tell you a bit about imposter syndrome and judging yourself against everyone else who all seems to be way more successful, and everything else that you see everywhere online and in social media. But we do kind of have a bit of a duty to try and to try and make the most of this opportunity.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. And I love all the stuff that you share on LinkedIn. So if anybody ever needs, to see some good motivational posts and a real life window into an entrepreneur's life, they definitely should go follow Thomas. So hopefully you don't get a huge influx in followers. Well, Thomas, is there anything that maybe we didn't discuss today that you think would be important for, our listeners to take away from our conversation?
I think you've given me a thorough grilling. I've really appreciated it, Nate. It's super interesting. I think what's probably quite relevant with your audience more towards the US. So I've been really excited over the last few weeks. I was over in New York for the National Retail Federation event, which was certainly very down on numbers, as you can imagine, but was a really great opportunity to engage with brands and retailers and lots of different solution partners. I'm actually over at Shop Talk in Las Vegas at the end of March, and I'll follow that on to a visit to the Bay Area as well. So, I'm very keen in this new opened world, and the fact that we really are trying to build a global business because we have a global team and we think this is a global problem, that if there are relevant partners, friends, investors that want to find out more about our business, as you say, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm normally a little bit better if people drop me a personal email. I appreciate the chance that there might be a few more followers on LinkedIn, but I'm sure half of them are virtual assistants or salespeople or bots or recruiters. I look forward to hearing from people who might want to have a serious conversation about how they can help us grow this business across the globe.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm sure that, like you, I'm very excited that events are coming back. So really excited to, see any of the headlines come up and some of the cool stuff that's going to come out of it. But Thomas, really appreciate the conversation today. I personally got a lot out of it, and I look forward to having you back on the show in the future.
Thank you. And I look forward to bumping you into an event, and we can have a free coffee or a beer at a free bar.
Absolutely. That sounds beautiful. Now, before we sign off, where can our listeners get in touch with Aisle 3? We've already talked about your LinkedIn, but if anything we've said has resonated.
Yeah, so the site is aisle-3.co, so that's AISLE-3.co. We're currently focused very much on the UK, but please check in, have a look, download the app, register with the site, and drop me any feedback, any advice, anything that you think that we can change. We're always very receptive to conversations with our shoppers.
Awesome, Thomas. Well, thanks for sharing your time with us.
Thank you very much, Nate.
That's it for this episode of E-commerce with Coffee, powered by Amber Engine. If you haven't gotten your fix yet, be sure to get more e-commerce brand secrets on our website at amberengine.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.